Mainly for economists, the idea of the state stepping in during a recession to offer some group of the unemployed a job was selectively adopted by the UK Labour government in 2009. See here by Paul Gregg. Richard Layard has proposed it for the long-term unemployed. We can think of both schemes as providing a partial insurance policy against the failure of countercyclical stabilisation policy to completely do its job in a downturn recession. But MMT Modern Monetary Theory economists go beyond that to suggest that it could be a permanent feature, which would eliminate involuntary unemployment without creating inflation. Given our recent experience, the use of a job guarantee as an insurance policy for all unemployed people during a recession seems like a good idea. Unwanted leisure is replaced by labor producing useful output, and paying a wage greater than unemployment benefits would add to automatic stabilizers. The devil is of course in the detail. JG jobs need to be set up to allow job search. Many jobs are created even in a recession, or if necessary retraining into the JG jobs would need to involve an output that was socially useful one. The main problem that Gregg discusses in his paper is the lock-in effect, where those in a JG job reduce their search activity. To combat that and for other reasons, it also seems helpful to provide detailed individual advice along the lines of the Swedish scheme described here. MMT economists have suggested ending such a scheme so that it operates at all times. As I understand it, any worker without a job would be offered a JG job. It can be refused with no consequences in terms of unemployment benefit, so in that sense it is not workfare. Many people who are confident of getting another job quickly might want to focus all their spare time on job search, and so might decline a JG job. Anyone who wanted a job could receive one, so the scheme would largely eliminate involuntary unemployment. In the rest of this post I'm going to focus on this idea of JG as being a permanent feature of an economy, rather than just something put in place during an economic downturn. A key issue is what the JG wage would be. In most MMT literature I have seen, the JG wage would be the minimum wage or better. See Mitchell here for example. There seems to be an obvious consequence of this. Unfortunately, many private and public sector jobs are paid the minimum wage. These jobs are risky, whereas JG jobs are by definition permanent. Minimum wage non-jobs may have compensating advantages like a career structure, but still it would seem probable that the existence of JG jobs paying the minimum wage would attract some workers from private sector minimum wage jobs. The obvious response would be for private and public sector employers paying minimum wages to increase their pay sufficiently to stop this happening, which in turn would often lead private sector firms to raise prices. How far this ripples through the economy is not certain, but it is quite possible that the overall price level rises by a noticeable amount. This higher aggregate price level would reduce the real value of the JG wage. If this reduced wage differentials in the economy as a whole, this process might be regarded by some as beneficial, but it is an implication that JG advocates need to acknowledge. A perhaps more serious concern is the impact of the JG on inflation. What is conventionally believed to prevent policymakers expanding demand sufficiently to eliminate all is that to do so would embolden workers to ask for greater pay increases, generating an inflationary spiral. The existence of and the possibility of joining their number becomes a threat that keeps inflation stable. In a JG economy, that threat is greatly reduced, both because an alternative job is always available and it will pay more than unemployment benefit. JG and the lock-in effect will also reduce geographic mobility, although the other side of that coin is that joblessness would not be a feature of deindustrialization. Suppose we start with an economy with stable inflation, implying unemployment was at the Nairu, and introduce JG. As this puts upward pressure on inflation because the costs of losing a job are reduced. The only way of keeping inflation stable is to deflate demand, which of course would reduce output, labor demand, and therefore increase the number of people on JG jobs. So if we were to compare two economies where inflation was stable, one with and one with JG, the number of JG jobs would exceed in the other economy. That does not mean that output would necessarily be lower in the JG economy, because JG workers are producing some kind of socially useful output while the workers are not. In welfare terms, you have also eliminated any non-pecuniary costs associated with spells of unemployment, and the distribution of income in the JG economy is more equal than in the economy. However, in practice, the productivity of JG workers will be pretty low, as they need to be allowed time for intensive job search, and the turnover in JG jobs is likely to be high. We have a trade-off, and if anyone can point me to any analysis of this particular trade-off, I would be very grateful. Can I end with a personal plea? When I write things like this, it is often assumed by MMTers that I am being critical for the sake of it. In other words, they think all I want to do is attack the JG or MMT. I don't. I have far better things to do with my time. I actually find the idea of JG appealing at an intuitive level. More generally, I agree with MMT on many things, although not all. But I am also fed up with policymakers implementing bad policies just because they're good to those policymakers, so I want to subject any policy I intuitively like to rigorous analysis. 1. JG jobs could be as assistants in police stations, schools and other public sector institutions. Or they could be jobs in social enterprises. 2. Keynes defined involuntary unemployment as those seeking a job at the going real wage. As JG jobs would be at the minimum wage, it would not eliminate all involuntary unemployment defined in this way. As I noted, those looking for a higher than minimum wage job who chose to stay unemployed would still technically be classed as involuntarily unemployed. But this is being a little pedantic. 3. Mosler and Sillipo Section 7 talk about the JG wage as a nominal anchor. This captures the idea that movements in the JG wage would influence other wages. However, nominal anchors, like the money supply or the exchange rate, are often talked about as being able to control the aggregate price level in the longer term on their own. The JG wage would not be able to do this. As the authors note, active stabilisation policy would still be required to do this, although the number of JG jobs could be a useful indicator of what action was required, just as the unemployment rate is now. Another way of saying the same thing is that the JG does not supplant the need for active macroeconomic stabilization.